All right, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us today for this webinar. I want to introduce the VP of Customer Relations. Is that right,
Close enough.
Dan?
Industry relations.
Industry Relations.
Yeah.
Dan Spears is going to talk to us about BMI. Um, Dan and I obviously have talked before this, and I remember back in my Smooth Ambler days with getting the letter that the live performances and things that we were occasionally having, and the music we were playing in the tasting room needed to be properly licensed so that we could do that. And I remember going down this road with BMI back in the day. So appreciate everybody being here. Just so you know, the Q&A should be turned on for you so that you can ask questions in the Q&A. I'll field those questions and pass them on to Dan so that he can address them as we go through here. So don't be shy about anything you want to know, and I'll probably ask some questions myself as we're going along here. And Dan, I will turn it over to you at this point.
Thanks, Johnny. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to your membership about a subject matter that's confusing. It's not the most exciting, sexy topic, but I'm going to try and make it as interesting as possible. We're going to, as I say in my title, we're going to pull back the curtain a little bit on music licensing. It can be very, very confusing. And I know in the distilling industry, music is now starting to play a more significant role in some of these tasting rooms. So we thought we could get ahead of things and provide some education in this space so that when you get calls from the BMIs of the world, you're more informed and more knowledgeable and able to discuss your licensing needs with these respective companies. So let's get started. Of course, Johnny, this worked well in practice, and now there we go. This is what we're going to cover over the next 25 minutes. And of course, we'll allow plenty of time for questions. We're going to kick things off by just spending a few minutes looking at some survey results. It's a survey we did a couple of years ago with an outside company called NRG, where we were surveying customers' feelings about music when it comes to choosing a restaurant, bar, distillery, brewery. We'll talk about the impact that music has in that decision-making process. We'll get into the whole music copyright issue, since that's kind of the foundation for this entire presentation and why we're here today. Talk about what's licensable in your distillery, the respective companies that you potentially would hear from when it comes to licensing your music. Briefly talk about the current license that's in place at BMI that would be applicable to you all. Legal ramifications if you don't license music. And then we'll talk a little bit at the end. If you're contemplating a live music program and don't really know where to start, we'll take a few minutes to kind of give you some tips on how to get that program rolling at your respective venue. And as I said before, we'll have plenty of time for questions. Yeah, so this is a research project that we did a couple of years ago. We wanted to just kind of get a sense from consumers about how significant is music, when it comes to making a decision on where you're going to eat, where you're going to drink, how long you're going to stay. And I'm not going to get into the weeds on the methodology, but we spoke with somewhere in the vicinity of 1,000 men and women across the country who regularly visit, we call them EDEs, eating and drinking establishments, and they went at least 3 times per month. We also talked to some business owners and talked about how important music is to their operations. So here are some of the key findings, and none of them will be surprising to you, I think. 61% will choose a bar or restaurant because of the music. Close to 80% will stick around if there's good music being played. Close to 60% say they'll buy more food and more drinks just to hear more of the music. Like I said, I want to get into all of these numbers. You can see them on the screen, but most of them point to the fact that when someone makes a decision about where they're going to go for their food and beverage, they're going to look at the music when making that determination. If they can't get a table at a restaurant, or there's a crowd at a distillery and they aren't able to get into the tasting room, if there's music there and the music is appealing, they'll stick around a little longer and wait for that table to open up. So obviously the conclusion that we found in this survey was not a surprise to us, that music can be a huge driver when people make decisions about where to spend their money. All right, the copyright law, I think most people are familiar with it, but for those that are not, the copyright law was created by Congress to protect intellectual property, not just music, literary works, recipes, anything that really is not a tangible product, rather it's kind of floats in the air like music, right? I mean, and so this copyright law was created by Congress, of course, a long, long time ago to protect that intellectual property on behalf of the creators. So when it comes to music, there are really three major rights within the copyright law. We call it the bundle of music rights. Not all three of these would be relevant to you or your business. The top one is the most relevant. We'll get to that in a second, but I just want to kind of give you a sense of the landscape when it comes to music rights. The one on the bottom is called the synchronization right, or the synchronization license. That needs to be obtained by a music supervisor or a producer when they want to use popular music or commercial music in a television show, a film, or a commercial. Synchronization refers to the fact that you're syncing music with video. So anytime that happens, the producer and or the music supervisor that wants to use that work has to approach the publisher of that song, which is the copyright holder. And we'll talk a little bit more about the role that a publisher plays in the music industry. But they would get that synchronization license directly from the music publisher. It'd be a negotiated fee that would allow them to use that song in a commercial, in a television show, in a movie, what have you. The next one up is called the mechanical royalty, or the right of reproduction. That's when there's a digital download, or you buy a vinyl or a cassette. That ain't happening, but some people are still buying CDs and vinyl. And a small piece of the sales of those physical products or digital downloads goes to the songwriter and publisher. It's not very much. It's 9.1 cents per song. And it used to be a pretty significant income stream for songwriters because people were buying albums in the old days, right? If you bought a George Strait multi-platinum album and you had a song, there was a songwriter that had a composition on that album, they could make some serious money because people bought albums. It's a singles world now, so that income has kind of dried up unless that song that you've written gets on the radio, which takes me to the first right. That's the right that we're going to be talking about primarily today. It's what BMI represents. It's called the public performance. And it's when a composition is played publicly by a business, whether it's a common space at a restaurant or a bar, whether it's streamed on a streaming platform like Spotify or played by a radio station or a television station. This is the primary source of income for songwriters. And that's why companies like mine exist, is to make sure songwriters are protected and granting those rights to businesses that use music and collecting licensing fees. So this kind of highlights what I just was discussing. We protect the public performance right on songwriters and publishers. So if you write a song, anytime your music is played on YouTube, bar, restaurant, distillery, you're entitled to get royalties, and we collect those on your behalf. So what is licensable in your business? Well, radio. If you've got a commercial radio station and you've got 6 speakers and you're booming it into your large distillery, that's licensable. There is an exemption if your square footage is less than 3,700 or so. I think it's 3,750. And you're playing a commercial radio station, only a commercial radio station, no other form of music. There is an exemption under the copyright law. You do not need to license that. But if your square footage is larger than that and you're booming in your favorite commercial radio station, you need to get a license. This is the most obvious form of public performance, live music. DJs is also licensable. If you're bringing a DJ on a Friday or Saturday night, you need to get a license or licenses, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Karaoke, same thing, requires a license. This is something that's often misunderstood. It doesn't seem to make sense, but it's written in the copyright law this way. If you have a television set in your distillery or your bar or your pub, and you got the audio turned on, and you have obviously an agreement with DirecTV or Xfinity to have a commercial license to publicly show that television set, believe it or not, the audio is the responsibility of the business to license. The video is handled, of course, by DirecTV or whatever cable provider you have. But if you have the audio on Any music coming out of that television set is your responsibility as a business to license, whether it's music coming out of a Super Bowl halftime show, music in a commercial, episodic music in a television show. That's the responsibility of the business. And I know a lot of people don't understand that. They think it doesn't make sense, but that's just how Congress wrote the copyright law. Commercial music services. So if you have Mood Media, Soundtrack Your Brand, any of these subscription services, Pandora for Business, and that's the only form of music you have in your distillery, and you're trying to do it to create ambiance, you do not have to license that music. That's already been licensed on your behalf. So when Mood Media comes knocking on your door and says, will you purchase a subscription with our commercial music service? They will tell you up front, that's part of their sales pitch. We have taken license agreements with all the performing rights organizations, all the music licensing companies, so that you don't have to. So if you have any of these companies and you're paying BMI or ASCAP or SESAC, and that's the only form of music you have in your distillery, that's double dipping, and you should cancel your agreements immediately because they're already being covered. Now, if you are choosing to personalize your music in your distillery by taking your Spotify account, creating a playlist, and then plugging it into your sound system, then you do need to get license agreements, because that Spotify account that you've set up is for personal use. And once you plug it into your sound system and make it a public performance, that would require a license, because Spotify did not authorize you to commercially broadcast that music. So you need to get an agreement or agreements with the various companies to secure the rights to that music. So this is very simple. BMI basically grants the right for businesses to use the music that we represent. The songwriters and composers create the work. The publishers own the work. So how does that work? Why do the publishers own the work and the songwriters don't? Well, publishers' role in the music industry is to serve as an agent for music, for songs, right? If you're a songwriter and you've written some songs that you think are commercially viable, but you have no ability to go out and market those songs and try and get, Tim McGraw to record it, or to get some television producer to put it in the new TV series they're working on. You can't do that. It's almost impossible. So you affiliate with a publisher, and the publisher takes on that role and goes out and represents your catalog to all these entities, these record labels or music supervisors. And so in exchange for having a publisher to do that for you, you grant them the copyrights to your songs, such that when royalties are produced from that music, you split the royalties 50-50. Now, if you become a more established songwriter or a performing songwriter, if you're Bruce Springsteen or Billy Joel, you create your own publishing companies, because you don't need them anymore to represent your works. You have a big enough name that your music is universal, and you don't need an agent for your songs. You are your own agent because of the cachet you have. So this is what we call at BMI, not the circle of life, the square of life. A songwriter affiliates with BMI or one of the other organizations, which we'll talk about in a minute. Now, I mentioned in this slide some very well-known performing songwriters, right? These are all artists that we all know for their touring and their recording, but they also write songs. Now, if I were being 100% transparent about who BMI really represents, in addition to these folks, I would list all these anonymous names on there that you've never heard of before, because they're the ones that truly are dependent upon these licensing fees that they get from businesses, particularly in the country genre. There's a community of songwriters in Nashville, as many of you know, that go in every day, punch the time clock, just like you and I do, to try and write a hit song for a Kenny Chesney. But if I listed all those names, you'd say, who the heck are they? So we list some of the more high-profile songwriters that also happen to be touring artists and very successful ones at that. So a songwriter joins BMI. We track those performances, right? We track how often a song is streamed on Spotify, how often it's played on a radio station. And then we go out and license that catalog of music, granting restaurants, bars, hotels, distilleries, breweries, radio stations the rights to use the music we represent. So after tracking those performances and collecting those licensing fees, we turn them around as royalties to our songwriters that they receive on a quarterly basis. And in that quarterly statement, it lists where these performances came from. Oh, you had 50 spins on this commercial radio station. You had 2 million spins on this station. You got this amount of streams on Spotify or Pandora, and it goes on and on. It's a very granular report that tells a songwriter exactly where his music is being played. I mention this only because sometimes distilleries, breweries, bars will have Cinco de Mayo Day, or they'll do a special St. Patty's Day celebration and play music that's international in scope. And BMI has reciprocal agreements with these international societies that are just like BMI. They do what we do, only on behalf of the songwriters they represent in their country. And so our reciprocal agreements would cover any of that music that you're publicly performing in your business. So we collect licensing fees on behalf of the Irish songwriter who might have music that's played in the US, and vice versa. The Irish Performing Rights Organization would collect licensing fees for businesses that are playing our songwriters like Taylor Swift or Willie Nelson, what have you. Pay those licensing fees to BMI after they collect them from the businesses, and then we include them in the royalty distributions. So if I were to tell you what's the most important part of this presentation, this is probably one of the most important aspects, because you need to know the players, the acronyms of these entities that will be contacting you if you do indeed use music in your distillery. So let's go over all of them so we can give you some knowledge and power when you have conversations with these folks and you don't feel like you're in the dark, because as Johnny and I were talking about before, biggest issue in this space right now is lack of education, which is understandable. I mean, there's no need for you to know about this system that's in place unless you're a business owner and start consuming music at your respective venue. So ASCAP was the first, and we call them performing rights organizations, basically music licensing companies. ASCAP was the first music licensing company to be born. They were created in 1914. The biggest consumers of music during that time were some of the early radio stations that had a lot of live music in their studios, and that needed to be licensed. So ASCAP was created to represent the catalogs of the George Gershwin, Stephen Foster types. And ASCAP was the only game in town until 1939, when BMI was created by broadcasters. Basically, the radio industry, as I mentioned before, was really the biggest consumer of music in those days. And because ASCAP had a monopoly, they were the only player, they were raising the licensing fees by 100% on an annual basis. Why? Because they could. They were the only game in town. They were a monopoly. So the radio industry got frustrated, and they said, we've got to create a competitive music source to bring these rates down. So they sold stock to create the seed money, and BMI was formed, thus the name Broadcast Music, Inc. Now, one of the things that's interesting that was also going on at this time, for any of you that are musicologists or fans of the history of music in the United States, ASCAP had a very strict requirement. You could only join ASCAP as a songwriter if you had at least 2 established hits on the radio. Well, during that time in the late 1930s, for any of you that watched the Ken Burns documentary on country music, you learned about the influx of music from Appalachia in the 1930s, which honestly has become the foundation for so many genres of music that we listen to today. Well, this new Appalachian music was coming into the United States, but radio couldn't play it because there was no copyright compliance vehicle in place to legally allow them to perform those songs, to spin that music. And they couldn't get that copyright compliance in place because ASCAP had a strict policy that said you could only join their organization if you had 2 established hits on the radio. For these Appalachian songwriters, it was a catch-22. Couldn't get on the radio because radio wouldn't play it without licensing in place. Couldn't get the music properly licensed because ASCAP wouldn't allow them to join without having radio exposure. So BMI was founded not only to bring the rates down, but they opened the doors to new forms of music. They said, anybody that wants to join BMI, come on in. They had no restrictions about you having to have music on the radio. And as a result, BMI is constantly referenced when talking about the explosion of American music during that time as being one of the catalysts. The Muddy Waters and the Little Richards and the Chuck Berrys are all BMI songwriters, primarily because of that open door policy. So BMI and ASCAP represent, I would say, close to 95 to 96% of all the music that you'd be playing in your distillery, or all the music that's played in the radio. Those are the two big players in the space. Both of those companies operate under Justice Department consent decrees because there are so few in this space. They created antitrust measures. Most of the consent decree would have no relevance to you all. There is one clause in there that's important. It says that we must treat similarly situated businesses in a similar fashion, which means we can't negotiate. So we offer the same rate and methodology for licensing fees to the distillery in Louisville, Kentucky, and it's the same rate that's charged to the distillery in Boston, Massachusetts. So we cannot negotiate. These are standard industry contracts. CSAC is a private organization that was founded in actually before BMI, and it's a very small catalog, but they've got a catalog of some fairly high profile songwriters. So it's very possible that if you consume a lot of music in your distillery, that you probably need to consider getting licenses with CSAC, BMI, and ASCAP. But I highly recommend, and this is going to be my message throughout this portion of the presentation, is you do your due diligence. You go online, you look at their catalog. All three of these companies have a searchable database, so you know what you're paying for when you take out license agreements, rather than blindly signing them because you're fearful of copyright infringement action. So these last two aren't as significant. In fact, one is not significant at all, really. Global Music Rights is a company that was founded by Irving Azoff back in 2013. He was the longtime manager of the Eagles. He said, I'm going to start a new performing rights organization, and I'm going to create a catalog of music that businesses that use music cannot do without. So he poached Bruce Springsteen, Bruno Mars, Pharrell Williams from ASCAP, brought them to Global Music Rights, paid them a ton of dough. They've mostly been trying to license the larger entities, the radio stations, the big brand hotels, the big brand radio groups, the big brand restaurant chains, but they could come calling at some point. So you just need to be aware of them. As I said, their catalog is much smaller, but they do have some pretty high profile songwriters. So it's possible that you could remove their music from some of your the playlists or set lists that your artists or bands are performing, but it's something to look at. Global Music Rights, just like CSAC, they don't operate under consent decrees, and they will come after you very aggressively in pricing. And my advice to you is push back and negotiate. Sometimes CSAC or Global Music Rights will quote you a fee that's similar to what BMI and ASCAP have, which is ridiculous because their market share is a small, tiny piece of what BMI and ASCAP represent. So push back. Say, look, I understand your right to exist. I'm probably playing your songwriters. I checked your database, but I'm not paying a fee that's not commensurate with how much product I'm using. So please make sure you push back with them if they get too aggressive in their pricing. Alltrack, I mentioned them because they've been somewhat of a disruptor in the space. They don't really represent, at least as of now, any commercially viable music. They represent mostly independent creators and publishers. However, they are acting like they have a very viable, robust catalog, and they're coming at businesses, maybe not distilleries yet, but maybe they will someday, but they've been going after breweries and restaurants saying, you need a license with us or you'll be sued for copyright infringement. And the average restaurateur or bar owner, fearful of that, just signs a license without really knowing what they're paying for. As it turns out, Alltrack doesn't really have much. It's almost a smoke and mirrors approach because they know that there's such a lack of education in the marketplace about this space. So they aggressively go after licenses, thinking, understandably thinking that these business owners don't know enough, basically don't know what they don't know. So they sign a license just out of fear. So please, do your due diligence on all of these organizations, including mine, before you sign any license so you're comfortable that you're paying for something that you're actually using. Benefits of a BMI music license, I would say this is the same for all the organizations, is that we grant blanket licenses to you so you can access as much of a catalog as you want to. A lot of people get angry and annoyed by this whole thing, which I understand. When you're getting hit up by all these organizations and you don't quite understand why, it can be very frustrating. But I will say that if all these organizations went away, that still wouldn't free you from having to license the music that you're using in your particular venue or business. You'd have to go to all the individual songwriters and publishers and negotiate separate licenses with every one of them, which would be impossible. So that is the benefit of these organizations. They give you a blanket license and you don't have to worry about individually licensing any of the songs. How are the agreements set up from a fee standpoint? Well, BMI's agreement, which is pretty similar to ASCAP's as well, the foundation for the agreement is the occupancy, the fire code posted occupancy in your particular distillery. That's the foundation for the fee. And then based upon your music use, that fee is adjusted. It can be higher or lower depending upon how much of these types of music you're offering. So for example, if you're doing live bands, which I doubt, 5 days a week, that's going to be a little more expensive license than if you have a singer-songwriter 2 days a week or a DJ 1 day a week. So it's really based upon frequency of music use, type of music that you're featuring, and what your posted occupancy number is. I would say the average annual fee for a distillery with occupancy of 100 people would probably be our minimum fee, which is around $400, $450. And that's very similar to what ASCAP charges. CSAC should charge much less than that. So my guess is if you just now started a live music program at your distillery, you probably pay collectively to all the performing rights organizations somewhere in the vicinity of $1,000 to $1,200 a year. This is a slide I hate to present, but I have to do it out of an obligation to you all. The copyright law is no joke in that it's black and white. If you fail to license your music and one of these organizations decides to be aggressive and sue you on behalf of all the publishers and songwriters they represent, it's not a pretty outcome. Normally these cases, of course, never go to court because a business owner will go to a local attorney and say, hey, I'm being sued by ASCAP. I want to fight back. And they'll be like, there's no fighting. This is black and white. If you use music, you need to compensate the songwriters and you need to do so through ASCAP, BMI, and the other performing rights organizations. So it's not a place you want to be. And that's why we're on this call together, is to try and give you some education so you don't find yourself in a pickle. Where does the money go? Well, at BMI, we publish where the money goes. 85 cents of every dollar you pay BMI goes directly to songwriters and publishers. So I always like to mention this, because if you leave this call with one piece of information that I want you to retain, and that is, yes, when you sign a license with BMI and you pay those fees, you are complying with the copyright law. Your lawyer will be happy with you for doing that. You'll be happy that you've complied so you don't get yourself in hot water. However, also think about the fact that by paying that money to BMI, 85 cents is going to help support the craft of songwriting. You're allowing new songs to continue to be written. And who doesn't want that to continue to happen? So for those of you on this call that do pay BMI already, thank you for supporting our songwriters and allowing creativity to continue. Because for many writers, as I said before, this is how they feed their families. As promised earlier, I said that I would mention to you for folks that want to start booking artists and don't know how to go about doing that. I'm going to mention that in the next few slides. Just want to give you some heads up that we will talk about that in a minute. But before we do, this slide I always put up here because for those of you, again, out there that do have licenses in place right now with BMI, ASCAP, or CSAC, all three of these organizations have this particular app that's available to their songwriters. And at BMI, we call it BMI Live. And what it is it's a way that local singer-songwriters who are, in our case, affiliated with BMI, if they're playing at a local distillery or a brewery or a restaurant or a bar, and they're playing original songs in addition to covers, under the current royalty distribution system at BMI, we use Shazam technology to track performances on radio. We have listening stations in every major market in the country, so we can accurately determine how often a Taylor Swift song is played. And all the money that we collect from the radio industry goes into the same pot of money that we've collected the licensing fees from all of the restaurants, bars, distilleries, and breweries. It all goes in the same pot, and we use the radio data to pay it out because we don't have the technology yet. We will someday to track every song in every small bar, tavern, restaurant, distillery, brewery across the United States. So the general feeling is if it's being played on the radio, it's probably reflected in the local venues. However, where there is a big hole in that methodology is when a local singer-songwriter plays an original song that doesn't get commercial radio airplay. It's only being played in some of the local venues where they live, in the town they live in. We fixed that a few years ago, and we came up with an honor system such that after their performance, they upload their set list to an app, the BMI Live app, and we take the licensing fee that you pay us and we pay them out of that licensing fee so that they are getting compensated as well. And it's a great system. It's worked very well for some of our songwriters. And for many, it's their majority of their income from a licensing standpoint is coming through this app because they're not getting commercial radio airplay, maybe minimal streams on Spotify or Pandora. Okay, as promised, during the pandemic, when things were bleak for all businesses, we said we got to figure out a way to try and help get the hospitality industry back on its feet. And so, what we did was we partnered with an organization, an online booking company called Gigmore, because we were looking at ways to drive people back to restaurants, bars, distilleries, tasting rooms, what have you. And we thought, well, maybe people could start featuring live music that haven't in the past. And we want to give them some tools to get a live music program started. So we vetted all of the online booking companies, and there are many, and we found that Gigmore best matched what we were trying to accomplish. So these companies like Gigmore, they're like Match.com for people that want an artist or a band for their particular venue. So you go onto the Gigmore website, you register as a venue, then you say, hey, I'm looking for an R&B band on Saturday night, and it lists all the bands within a 30 or 40 mile radius. You negotiate a fee with them, and you're off to the races. So that's a great way to get a live music program started if you don't know anything about the local music scene in your respective community and you want to tap into that. Gigmore.com does a great job. So I think I did it in, what time we got? About a half an hour. So time for questions, Johnny.
All right, so there's a couple of questions up here that I'll relay to you and a few of my own. So first of all, one of the questions was, what's the difference between BMI and ASCAP, and do you need to get both licenses? And I think you pretty well covered that the only way to cover your ass is to have both licenses, because there's no way you could guarantee that you're playing something on Spotify where every song is a BMI covered. I mean, it seemed to me you could probably do it, but the rational response is nobody has time to sit and figure that out, right?
Well, here's the challenge, and I always say this to any business I'm talking to, whether in the business of selling spirits, beer, food, whatever. That's your business, right? Music is secondary to that, and you don't want to have to hire a staff person to be tracking all the music that's being performed by the local band or singer-songwriter or what have you, and determine, oh gosh, we only have a BMI agreement, they can only play BMI songs. The problem is, yes, you could go on BMI's website and pull out all the BMI songs, and there are thousands and thousands and thousands of them that were written by just BMI songwriters, and tell any band or singer-songwriter that comes in, you can't stray from this. However, the problem is so much of the popular music today is co-written, right? Particularly in the country genre and the world of hip hop. Hip hop sometimes has 5 or 6 songwriters attached to a song. It's not uncommon in country radio to have 3, never 1. It's always 2 or 3, sometimes 4. And the collaboration can be between a BMI songwriter and an ASCAP songwriter. So in order to play that song, you need to have agreements with both BMI and ASCAP. So to your point, Johnny, you don't have to be monitoring that all day long. So in order to just give you peace of mind, most businesses would take a BMI, ASCAP, and CSAC license, and maybe GMR, but mostly those 3 are the most prominent in terms of commonly licensed businesses have that.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you, I've been in a band for 25 years, and if a venue ever handed us a a
Right.
document that said we could only play songs. There was no way
Yeah.
we would do it or want to do it in, in the real world. That just doesn't happen. So let's talk about a loophole. So you said 3,700 square feet.
I think it's 3750. I always
All right,
forget the
well,
exact
all
number.
right, well, 3,750. So let's say my distillery, and this was true of Smooth Ambler. So let's say the public facing area where we're playing Spotify is 500 square feet, 800 square feet. But the production area is 5,000 square feet, and the distillers are listening to Metallica while they're making mashes and running the still.
Yeah. Okay. So I got two things in response to that. First of all, if you have a space in your distillery that's posted, the fire code number is 500 for the customer facing area. That is the number you work with. We don't care about the back office, what's going on back there. If your distillers are listening to Metallica in the production facility, that is not considered a public performance of music. That's private. That's amongst them in the back room. Now, with the exemption, that only applies to a commercial radio station. So if you've got WXYZ in Louisville, Kentucky that you love because they've got, a reggae show every Saturday night and you want to play that in your facility, if you have less than 3,750 square feet, then you don't need to license that. But that doesn't apply to bands, streaming Spotify. That's only a commercial radio station.
Got it. So the license would be so you'd still need, in my example, whether your tasting room would hold 30 people or not, you still have to have the license, but the price of the license is based on that
Correct.
small public facing space.
That's correct. So in other words, if your tasting room has got 30 person fire code number versus 1,000, then that's going to impact your fee pretty significantly, versus the guy who has 1,000, he's going to be paying a lot more than you are.
Now, what I love, but I think these are the questions that people are asking themselves.
Sure.
So we all give tours.
Yeah.
So does that make now that 5,000 production area, because that's going to have a fire code occupancy attached to it, but none of us will ever reach that occupancy. Not really, because it's mostly production area 95% of the time. And, on Saturdays you bring a tour through for 20 minutes or something like that.
Well, I think that's a behind the scenes. I mean, I've been on many of them myself. Yeah. That's not a public area. That is a private area that you're being given special access to. So if I'm not a lawyer, but I've been around enough of them, and I think that we would generally say that would not play into your license fee methodology. Taking these behind the curtain tours of a distillery, I would not include that square footage when reporting, or excuse me, that occupancy number when reporting that information to BMI. Because when you fill out your contract, your report form, it will ask you, what's your fire code number? What's your occupancy number? I would not include that production facility fire code number.
Got it. And when you say commercial, give us the industry definition of a commercial station. Sirius XM, while not a playlist or a Pandora or a Spotify, my guess is not considered a commercial.
Yeah, I'm only talking about over-the-air radio. I'm talking about on your FM dial, on your AM dial. Now, Sirius has a commercial license, a background music license or service that you could access. Speaking of Sirius, you could pay for that for commercial use, but you could not take your own private Sirius account and boom that into the facility. That would be similar to what I talked about before, taking your personal Spotify account.
Got it. I understand. Go back, because I was fascinated by this too. So you're paying for NFL Sunday ticket. You own a sports bar and you're paying for NFL Sunday ticket. You're paying that extra fee.
Yep.
You're saying that even though the image on the TV and the sound that comes through is completely inseparable. It's not like you can pay Sunday Ticket a lower price just to have the video and not the audio. In which, as you say, there will certainly be licensed music at some point. Like
Yes.
commercials, halftime shows,
Yes.
the background music.
Yes. Yes.
You still have to have that. I get it, but I got
Well,
to admit, it seems, like you can't, I'm paying for this license and you can't have one without the other.
well, what you can do is, and I tell people this, I probably shouldn't because I want to collect, we want to collect as much in the way of licensing fees for songwriters as possible. But if you're a business and the only public performance of music that you currently have is the audio coming out of your television sets, right? And you don't want to pay licensing fees. You're a small operation. Your margins are very small. You just turn the audio off if you want to avoid all of that.
Right.
Just turn the audio off. I mean, it may not create the ambiance that you're looking for, but it certainly is a way to get around having to deal with paying for it.
Got it. What does anything change if you have music outside? Because, like, let's say, and again, I'm just using my real world example. So, Smooth Ambler, the internal occupancy was one thing. We could get far more people outside, although that's not an official occupancy. It also, just because there was a lawn out there that would hold 400 people doesn't mean we ever had 400 people on it. How does that work if you have it outdoors? Your music is out, both pumped and or live performance, outdoor only, or on a patio, or whatever. How does that?
Yeah, we would work with you in trying to determine what's the appropriate fee based upon your approximation of how many people you can get in that space. Obviously, you don't have a fire code number for outside, but the reason why we have that fire code number, why we use that, because it's a standard number, right?
Right.
Everybody has that number, and we don't have to get into the business of going into all these establishments and bring out tape measures and figure out square footage and all of that. Now, outdoors, because there's no fire code number, we would work with you to try and determine, what's the realistic number of people that are actually accessing that music outdoors.
And it doesn't really, as a business, it doesn't really matter, or you tell me, does it matter how something is zoned, or does it matter the audience? Like, it doesn't matter. One of the questions is, what if the space is not zone commercial, but it's just an agricultural zoning space? Does that matter, or is it just it's based on public listeners, no matter
It's
how?
based upon if it's a public performance. I mean,
Yeah.
The difference between a private and a public performance is that this sounds obvious, but it's important to note, is that it's accessible to the general public. For example, if you're a distillery and you decide to shut down on Sunday to the public because somebody's bought out the distillery for their wedding or some corporate event, that is not licensable. That is considered a private performance. Much like, Johnny, when you go and you bring all your friends in, you jam in your backyard at your house and you've got playing all these cover songs, you're not responsible for licensing that because that's a private performance. That would be the same. That would be the same thing if again, if you're a distillery and you choose to do private events, weddings and such, where they're bringing in bands, that's not your responsibility because that is a private performance. That's only an event that can be attended by an invited group of people, not the general public.
Right. But you'd have to cover your butt legally if someone were to come in and say, hey, you're having these live performances. You'd have to document that they only ever happen in a private, invitation only environment, right?
Yeah. But I mean, look, I mean, when we have a licensing sales team in Nashville that to me has the hardest job in the world. I mean, sales is tough enough, but to call in and try and get someone to sign a license for an intangible like intellectual property is very, very difficult. We use a lot of social media posts to determine what a business is doing. And, much of that stuff that is considered licensable would be showing up on Facebook and Instagram and things, but a wedding and that sort of stuff would not. So you would not get a call from us unless you are obviously promoting music use and music events at your distillery. If we go on and we find out there's really nothing that you're doing, we would have no idea about those private performances anyways.
Yeah. And listen, I've been playing devil's advocate a little bit,
Yeah.
but I do want to come back around and highlight something that you said that I think is important. I know that people get, I think, and I had it, and I'm a damn musician. I mean, the first time I had this discussion with somebody from BMI, it was hard for me to wrap my head around, because as civilians, we're just so used to walking into a space with music playing, and we're used to
Right.
playing. I mean, of course you put music on if you're going to do something, whether, no matter what it is. And so I think it's if people have a really big emotional response to being asked to pay for the rights to do these. But if following your example, to get right with you and with ASCAP, and I think the other one you mentioned, it's $100 a month, give or take. I mean, it's
Yeah.
not, you know, when you it's not the biggest expense. I know that people out there listening to me say this are like, I just don't want to pay the $100 a month. I get that, but I mean, it's not 100, it's not $12,000 a year to be able to do this, or 5,000 or whatever. And hopefully, if your first slide is true, and I believe that it is, as a music lover, and that's adding to the experience. I mean, you got to sell a couple extra bottles in your tasting room every month to pay for that $100, and then you don't have to worry about any of these things.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
look, look, I know a lot of the businesses that are on this call and people that I've spoken with over the last 36 years I worked for BMI. For them, it's an ROI thing, right? I mean, if music is bringing people in and you're selling spirits in your case, or in this industry's case, and music is playing a role in that, then you probably have no problem with it. But if you struggle to see that ROI, some people will discontinue their live music program. Some people will say, I still want to keep music in there, even though I'm not necessarily seeing a tangible, a tangible result. It's part of my brand, right? People
right.
come to my place because they know that music is a part of the experience, and I'm not worrying about whether that $500 I paid that singer songwriter, is going to come back to me in sales, because I just know it's a loss leader. It's just part of who we are.
So, yeah, listen, I, as I said, when we first, you and I very first talked the first time, I see both sides of it. I
Sure.
certainly, as a musician, want to make sure I'm supporting other musicians, and as a business owner, I want to make sure that I'm complying and doing the right things. And again, it is only $100 a month. As I said, I remember my first job was working for Golden Corral, and we had generic instrumental music pumped in every day, and nobody wants to hear that. No offense to Muzak, but like, I want to hear the real Hotel California. I don't want to
Right.
hear a generic instrumental version of Hotel California
Right.
while
Right.
I'm washing dishes at Golden Corral. Okay, the question is, if you're working on a space that you expect to use some music in, how do you get an estimate on, like, if it isn't just cut and dried obvious, like you have a huge back room and you may have a little bit of music outside, or you know maybe you've got your occupancy from the fire code, but you may be adding on, or maybe you don't even have it yet. How would you get an estimate? Because the question is, I guess somebody went to your website, and your website just says pay for a license. How do you send somebody out? Is there some way you can have a discussion prior to that?
Well, this person, let's see,
It's Mark Williford,
Mark.
actually.
So Mark,
Yeah.
hi Mark. You can email me, and I can send you. There's a report form that's on the back end of our license. That's You can just print it out and calculate a few numbers, and you'll figure out what your approximate fee will be. It'll ask you a couple of questions like how many times a week do you have live music? Do you have recorded music? Do you have a DJ, karaoke? What's your occupancy number? And then you just fill it out, and the number pops out at the bottom. So it's pretty easy to estimate what your fee is going to be. I'll send you that. If you reach out to me, Mark, I'll send you that report form. It's not a sting operation. I'm not going to pay attention to the company that you're with. I'm not going to sick anybody on you, because I want this to be a safe space. I don't want you to think, oh my God, as soon as I went on this call with Dan, the entire sales team at BMI was all over me. We won't do that. We'll just have a private communication where I'll send you that form, and then you can go to the website once you feel comfortable with the fee.
Sounds good. we'll just take a couple more minutes to see if anybody has any additional questions,
Sure,
or if we
sure.
didn't quite cover all of the subject matter that people were curious about in their initial questions. But
A lot of
I'll at
people
least,
ask, yeah,
yeah,
didn't want to interrupt, but a lot of people
no,
ask this question. It's not necessarily germane, directly to businesses, but a lot of people ask me, well, if you're a songwriter, can you be a member of more than just one of these organizations? Can I join BMI and ASCAP and CSAC? No, as a songwriter coming up, you sign or affiliate with one performing rights organization, and it behooves you to do so. I mean, if you're not affiliated, you're leaving money on the table, right? Because in this day and age, there's so many ways that people consume music, and there's so many ways you can get your music out there. But if you don't have an affiliation with one of these organizations that's tracking your music, you're leaving money on the table when your songs are streamed on Spotify, or you're doing YouTube videos, or that adds up. Nickels become quarters, quarters become dollars. And so um, it doesn't make sense for a songwriter not to affiliate. However, there are some that don't. And I always mention this in my call again. I hate saying this because I want you all to be BMI customers, but if you're working on a very tight budget and you still want music, and you've got a couple local singer songwriters that that have that you think you want to support and you think would make for great musicians to bring into your distillery, but again, you don't want to pay BMI, ASCAP, or CSAC, even if these singer songwriters are affiliated with BMI or ASCAP, as long as they're playing just originals, you can ask them to grant a direct license to you and bypass those performing rights organizations, because the contracts that our songwriters have with BMI and ASCAP, for that matter, do not prohibit that. They are not exclusive in the sense that, Johnny, if I go into your distillery and I say, hey, I'm a local singer songwriter, I want to play in your venue on Thursday and Friday night, and you say, well, I don't have any music licenses, so you can't. And I said, well, how about this? I'm a BMI songwriter. I only play original songs. I don't play any covers at all. I'm going to just write out a little document here that says I grant you the public performance rights to Dan Spears' entire catalog. And as long as I come in and I just play originals and I don't play covers, then none of the performing rights organizations would have an ability to come after me and ask for a license, because I would simply say I'm only using local singer songwriters who are playing originals, and they have granted me directly the public performance rights. And that's a big and to include in that response, because a lot of people think, oh, if I have songwriters or artists or bands that are just playing originals, then I don't need a license because they're not playing covers. But so many, as I mentioned before, so many of the songwriters out there, whether they're successfully commercially or not, are affiliated with these organizations because they don't want to leave money on the table, as I said before. So just make sure that if someone calls you from one of these performing rights organizations and says, hey, you got live music on Saturday night, that you don't say, oh, but my artists only play original songs, because all songs are technically original, right? But just make sure that they know that you've negotiated a public performance right directly with them. And so there's no need for a license.
good to know. Anyway, this is just, it says, thank you for doing the webinar. Most of us have received letters and scratch our head wanting to do the right thing, but feeling a bit muscled for money out of the blue.
Yeah.
And again, I get that. I
do
think
too.
Most people have a real emotional response to this. And
totally agree. And, part of it is our fault. When I say our, I mean the industry as a whole, because we can be very aggressive in trying to protect the rights of our songwriters. And it can sometimes border on harassment. I'd like to think that our company doesn't do that. We've got a pretty highly trained, customer focused sales team that tries to avoid being predatory and harassing. But the category itself has got a lot of work to do, because a lot of companies that are competitors, and sometimes we do it as well, we're not customer focused in our approach. We say sign a license so you'll be sued for infringement, and it's very predatory in nature, and it poisons the entire category. So for anybody that's received those calls and is frustrated by the confrontational aspect to it, I apologize. It's not the way to go. And that's why I do these webinars and try and get out as much as I can to educate, and so that you have knowledge, where they say knowledge is power. You have knowledge, so when someone calls you up, you don't feel helpless. Oh, I guess I better sign a license because I don't know much about this, but I don't want to be sued. Hopefully at the end of this presentation, you feel empowered a little bit more, and you can ask the right questions so that when you pay for something, you know why you're paying for it and where the money's going. And that's very simple, but sometimes it's not properly articulated.
Well, in a perfect world, right? This would be because again, lots of businesses, most businesses, but I think particularly hospitality and food and beverage. I mean, everybody knows. They might not know the numbers that you showed, but everybody knows that having good music
Right. Right.
personally for your employees, for the public, everybody else, it really should be more integrated as part of launching a business instead of,
I agree.
well, I'm going to do whatever I want, and then when my hand gets smacked or I get a letter, then I'll start thinking about it.
I
It
agree.
really should be, and again, perfect world. It should be more integrated into the original business. Hey, if we're going to have music, we're going to have this, $100 to $150 a month charge, whatever it is, baked into the same pie that everything else is baked into. But somehow or another, we act like music rights is just this foreign, crazy thing.
Does the ADI have a checklist that they provide someone who's starting a distillery and opening up a tasting room?
We
Because it'd
don't
be
have
interesting. Yeah, it'd be
yeah, we
interesting if
don't have an updated one. We should for sure.
you could add this to it, right? Got to get a liquor license. Got to do this. Got to do this. Get the music licenses if you're
Yeah,
using music. So, yeah,
yeah. So, question, just a couple last
yeah,
questions. What happens if you're at a farmer's market
yeah.
and like you're just playing some stuff on your phone just to have some background music? I've done this at whiskey shows, uh, a bunch. I go in, I roll in, set up my table, get my bottles of whiskey out, and put a little speaker on because I want some music, some music playing.
Okay, well, that's a little more complicated, but I'll take a shot at answering it without getting too into the weeds. If that farmer's market is kind of hosted by the community, right? So let's say it's the Redondo Beach Farmers Market. A lot of these communities have licenses with BMI, ASCAP, CSAC to cover any public performance of music on the streets of their community, right? They're doing a festival or a parade or something like that. A lot of the municipalities have licenses in place so that when you do that, that would be included in their blanket license. Now, if that community doesn't have a license in place and the farmers market is not a public hosted event, it's hosted by a private company, a for-profit company that's putting on this farmers market. I don't know enough about farmers markets to know if that's
Yeah,
even a thing. Um, and that it would be the responsibility of the owner of that farmers market to secure a license with BMI so that all the vendors could play music at their respective booths. So in the end, if you played music at your booth and it was not licensed because the community didn't have a license or the owner of that farmer's market didn't have a license, it would be on them, not you, in terms of getting into hot water uh, because you're a vendor playing music at an event that should be licensed and is not. And so it's not it's almost like people ask me this all the time. When a band comes in, I know Johnny, you're a band member. If your band goes in and plays covers at Joe Blow's bar, the band will never ever be sued or get in trouble for playing all the songs from Billy Joel's catalog. That's not the band's responsibility. It's the bar, restaurant, distillery, brewery from which that music emanates from. They're responsible for taking a license. So I use that as an analogy. If you're playing music at your booth at an event, farmers market, a convention, it's the convention planner, the event planner, the farmers market planner, the community from which this music is emanating from, they bear the responsibility for licensing that.
yeah. I can assure you, the tiny ass little farmers market back in West Virginia, where I lived for so long, is definitely does not have an agreement
Well,
with anybody. And like
I don't think
that's
anybody's going to come shutting that thing
yeah,
down.
yeah,
I
that's right.
think you're going to be all right.
And by the way, and I say this with my tongue firmly planted in my cheek and with love in my heart, Dan. So don't take it the wrong way. But I can't spend 30 years in West Virginia without telling you that it's Appalachian, not Appalachian.
Thank you. Appalachia.
You're
Now you've,
welcome.
yeah, now I've mispronounced it to at least 50,000 people over the last few years. So
Well, listen, as long as
Appalachia.
if they're all Yankees, nobody will care. But
Okay.
once you get far enough south, it's that sweet tea is offered with everything. You better start saying Appalachia.
Okay, that's fair.
Um,
I will keep that in mind.
this somebody asked the 2 or 3 services that you recommended having, and I don't know if you can officially say recommended, but I know ASCAP is one. But the big players are BMI, ASCAP, and what was the third one that you?
CSAC.
That
CSAC.
CSAC. Okay.
ASCAP and BMI represent about 95% of all the music out there. CSAC represents about 3%. GMR, Global Music Rights, about 2%. So you just got to take a look at their catalogs, which are all searchable online, and determine, I think ASCAP and BMI are no-brainers. I think CSAC is close to maybe being a no-brainer. GMR, you got to take a look at.
Yeah.
But I would start with ASCAP and BMI. I would if I'm starting music in my distillery, I would get a license with ASCAP and BMI, and then see if CSAC even contacts me. If they do, I would enter into conversations about it with them and determine whether it's something that I need or not.
I know you're not a lawyer, or maybe you are, but
No.
you if I heard what you just said right, you would go and frankly, this is what I did. Is we got licenses from BMI and ASCAP, and then I just waited if somebody else
Yeah, I
came
mean,
along, came along and complained.
yeah, I mean, if
They
yeah, and if they do, don't ignore them because
Yeah,
CSAC can
right.
be CSAC. I keep using the word aggressive with CSAC, but they can be pretty darn aggressive, and you need to deal with them. But make sure that you negotiate with them. You say, hey, listen, I acknowledge your right to exist. We may be playing your songwriter's music, but I'm not paying the same rate that I pay BMI and ASCAP because I know for a fact that the two of those organizations represent 95% of the music. So why would you charge me what they're charging?
Yeah.
But I wouldn't ignore them. I wouldn't put them off. I would stay engaged with them. As long as you're staying engaged with them and negotiating with them, they're not going to take any legal action whatsoever. And I'm
I
not a
think you
lawyer,
said
but I know that for a fact.
Well, I think you said something really important when you were going through that, which is, why should I put why am I being asked to pay the same amount as these other companies when the product that I'm getting
Right.
is far less? And I think
Right.
it's a good phrase to have in your pocket if those people do
Sure.
come calling.
You go to a restaurant and they say, hey, if you want the full buffet with all the hot meals, it's this rate. If you're just buying a continental breakfast, it's half that. Well, look at it that way. BMI and ASCAP are more of a full buffet with all the hot foods. CSAC is more of a continental breakfast. So I want to pay the rate for the continental breakfast.
Yeah, right. Somebody asked, just out of curiosity, what is the thinking on busking? I mean, if somebody's sitting on the side of the street playing a song and they've got their guitar case open, people throwing money in. I mean, obviously, I don't know as that applies for a business, but just out of an industry curiosity, I know that you said some municipalities.
Yeah, most of the big ones do.
Yeah, yeah,
So, I mean, technically, if you want to, play by the letter of the law, you would hope that, most of the buskers are playing in, Nashville and in the streets of LA and New York, all of which would have license agreements to cover the public performance of music on their streets. I doubt, Peoria, Illinois may not have a license if someone's busking, but I doubt very seriously that someone's going to come and shut you down for playing on the streets. I mean,
yeah, right. Well, listen, Dan, thanks so much for
thank
talking
you.
this through with me and with everybody on the call. We really appreciate it. I having gone through this, as I said, I thought I knew this pretty well, but even I learned some stuff today about it, and I think it's been a great discussion and one that everybody needs to have and think about. And again, especially the music nerds of the world like me that just couldn't do without it. I mean, you told me I had to go to work every day and couldn't listen to play. I mean, we even had our own playlist through the business that we would play
Yeah.
and sort of
Yeah.
curate ourselves that we thought were good for our mood. And I know everybody does some version of that. So,
Well, thank you for the opportunity to speak to your members. And again, if anybody has any questions that they didn't want to talk about in a public forum like this, you want to email me privately. I'm happy to help, whether it's BMI related or ASCAP or CSEC or what have you. And I'm going to spend the rest of the afternoon saying Appalachia, Appalachia, Appalachia.
Yeah, I'll just send you a cheater sheet. You just remember
Thank
like
you.
a picture of an apple
And a latch.
Appalachia.
Appalachia. I got
It's
it.
all good. It's all good, my friend. Thank
All
you
right.
so much.
You bet.
I
Thanks,
appreciate
Johnny.
it.
Appreciate
You got
y'all.
it.
Take care,
See ya.
everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.